Welcome back to Axis Anime. My name is Henshin Ikeda, and today I'll be doing a walkthrough review of Blasted Tempest episode 20. Now, if you remember from last episode, we actually find out Maharu runs into Yoshino at the cemetery, and the shit has hit the fan. That's right, Maharu now knows the truth about Aki and Yoshino, that they're a boyfriend and girlfriend. But somehow he's actually being very calm about it, and that kind of bothers me, because when he's calm, that usually means he's thinking about something else and he's about to do something else, but that's really not the case here. In fact, Yoshino and Maharu are really good friends. In fact, they're really good friends to the extent where they're cool with what has just gone down, and that kind of bothers me in a small way, of course. However, we are taken to a different scene with Hokage, and she's actually requesting Mrs. Yamamoto to retrieve Seimon's barrel as well as Maharu's doll from Mount Fuji. Why? Why is she making a weird request like that? We really don't know. However, we are taken to a different scene toward the end of the episode with Hokage, and this is the plan that she came up with. After she gets Seimon's barrel as well as Maharu's doll together, and of course she makes the appropriate offering, she wants to go back in time to find out who murdered Aki. And again, that's where the episode ends, and I'll have my final thought and rating at the end of the clip, so stay tuned. But let's dive right on in. So we open up this episode with a lot of men on Mount Fuji in like green outfits. You can tell they probably work for the government, and again, they're actually working for Hayakawa, and apparently they actually find Seimon's barrel as well as Maharu's doll. But again, that's where we open up with. Moving on past that, of course, we are taken to a different scene with Hayakawa. And I should point out, he is the one that's behind the guys in the green outfits that actually work for the government. So he's actually the one that's helping out Hokage right now, which is kind of weird because I kind of had him pegged as the bad guy, but I may have been wrong. But, it's not too early. I still think he is kind of the villain. He has that little background of not being the most supportive character. However, we are taken to a different scene with Hokage, and she's basically explaining her plan again, how she's going to go back in time, and it still kind of bothers me, but bear with me. Again, we open up with this scene with Hokage, and she's basically explaining to everyone how she's going to go back in time and find Aki's murderer. And in order to do that, of course, she has to make the appropriate offering and whatnot. But you know what? It's a what the fuck situation. Because you know what? If you're going to go back in time, then how about you stop the person from killing Aki instead of just watching Aki die and seeing the murderer? It just does not make any sense. I don't know about you, but that just doesn't make any sense to me. But you know what? In a different situation, of course, that's been brought up, if she goes back in time, she'll be altering the future per se, and reality is going to be all fucked up. So it kind of makes sense why she's not going to save Aki in general. But you know what? That still kind of bothers me. I don't care how you look at it. It does bother me. However, she does tell Maharu and Yoshino that whatever does happen, she's going to tell them the truth of what she's seen. Although I don't know really what that's really worth to them, but at least she said something. However, we are taken to a different scene with Hanamori, and I can't believe it. This happens to be one of my favorite scenes in this episode, even though it's really small. Hanamori actually opens up with asking Hokage, well, why don't you go back in time and, save Aki from dying? It kind of makes sense. I mean, you do have magic, and you are, the princess of, the Tree of Genesis per se, so why don't you save her? And I love it. However, we are taken to a different scene with Mrs. Yamamoto. She actually answers for Hokage apparently, and says, well, if she does go back in time and she does save Aki, well, then our reality is going to be all fucked up. Plain and simple. I'm like, our history is going to change. That's not really good. So we're taken to a different scene with Hokage, and then she points out, well, I can't change the past, because reality is going to be altered. So she also says pretty much the exact same thing Mrs. Yamamoto says, and that ends that little conversation there, of course. Now moving on past that, it's game time. I love saying that. Let me say it one more time for dramatic effect. It's game time. So we are taken to a different scene with Hayakawa, and now he's playing his part in this little plan, of course. He actually obtains one air-to-air missile, because that's going to be the offering for Hokage in order for her to go back in time. And I should also point out just a little brief information. Hayakawa is back where he was originally at job-wise. He's back in Central, so he has a high-paying job again where apparently he has some power and shift within the government, I guess. That's how he was able to actually obtain the missile, which I thought that was definitely worth mentioning, because I do think he still is the villain, or at least a bad guy. He has something to pull in this anime series, but I could be wrong, but sorry, I do digress. However, we are taken to a different scene with Seimon, and he's got a great question. He actually kind of asks Hokage, well, not Hokage directly, of course, on what's her real reason for going back in time. So I guess he actually was directing this at Hokage in general, but he was being very nice about it. Like, what's the real reason, Hokage, that you're going back in time? You're not just there to witness who's going to kill Aki. there's got to be other motives. And he basically points out, well, you could be the killer. I mean, what if you do go back and you find out that you're the killer, you kill Aki? But Hokage basically points out in a different conversation, of course, well, even if I do go back to, if and when I do go back in time, the truth could be dull, could be boring. I'm like, how could you say that? That's like saying you're going to watch the murderer kill Aki and you're going to be bored with the outcome of who you find out is going to be the killer. I'm like, that's kind of cold. However, we are taken to a different scene with Yoshino, and he basically asks Hokage in general, well, why couldn't you go back in time and save Aki? I'm like, finally! So now he finally says it. I'm like, more power to you, Yoshino, more power to you. And I love the question he asks. However, Hokage replies, well, if I do go back in time, I'll be altering reality, and that little spiel. And she does point out an interesting little tidbit of thing. You know what? I could go back in time and save Aki and switch out her body with someone else's body so it appears like Aki's dead and then bring her to the future or something like that. But you know what? I'm not going to do that. Because you know what? I love you, Yoshino. That's what she says. And I'm not going to do that because it's not right. Like, oh, that's bullshit. That's bullshit. You tell me where there's a fucking paradox, and I guarantee you, Yoshino's going to come up with some random excuse to make it so it's not in her favor, that it's in his favor. But again, I digress. That's not what really does happen, of course. Because again, Hokage basically pulls out of her ass, I'm in love with Yoshino, and you know what? I'm doing this for you. At the same time, I'm also doing this for me, so I'm not going to bring Aki back, but I am going to tell you who the killer is, regardless of everything that's actually happened. I'm like, okay, enough of that. I'm sick of hearing that. So we are taken to a different scene, and it's on. That's right. She travels back in time. Finally! I mean, that's what we were waiting for. Now, we are taken to a different scene with Hokage, and apparently she's naked on the island. That's right. Remember the island she was originally trapped on? Well, that's what she was originally transported back to. I thought that was well worth mentioning. And again, she's nude on a beach. Doesn't get any better than that. Plain and simple. I thought that was definitely worth mentioning. And she feels nostalgia because she's back on the same island she was trapped on. I thought that was worth mentioning. However, it's now a half a year back from where she was originally at. So the island that she left, it's been a half a year. Although it's only been minutes, because of the transfer-wise when she went back in the past. But again, a half a year has passed. And she has a bazooka. I'm guessing that's another offering she's going to actually offer up when she actually tries to transport herself to Japan, which is exactly what actually happened. So she has a bazooka she offers up to the Tree of Genesis in order to transport herself to Japan. I definitely thought that was worth mentioning because you know what? It's a girl on an island in the middle of nowhere with a bazooka. Doesn't get any more weirder than that. Now, I should also point out there is 1 month prior to where Aki's been murdered, so we have 1 month left until Aki's actually killed, so she arrived just in time. However, she's not in Japan yet. Now, we are taken to a different scene with Seimin back in the future, or should I say the present, and he's basically telling Mahuro, well, what happens if, Hokage is the killer, Then Mahuro basically explains, well, I'm going to kill her. So if Hokage is the killer, Mahuro is going to kill her. I'm like, okay. So the same question is being pushed on Yoshino. Well, what happens if Hokage is the killer? He's not going to do anything. I'm not going to kill Hokage. But you know what? If Mahuro ends up trying to kill Hokage, I'm going to stop him. And they're all in the same room while talking about this, and they're cool with it. I'm like, so you're going to kill him if she kills him? I'm like, what? You just don't say that in front of someone you're plotting against or going to plot against if something like that happens. It just, what? I'm sorry, that just fucking does not make any sense. I'm just putting that out there. Just really, good God. I'm just putting that out there, of course, But sorry, I digress. Now, of course, Mrs. Yamamoto throws us a freaking curveball, and I wish she would have shut the hell up. I mean, apparently, if Yoshino happens to be the killer, because he may or may not have a split personality, he might be the killer. I'm like, why would Mrs. Yamamoto bring this fucking little curveball up like that? That just does not make any sense. Everyone has their own theories on who the fucking killer is, and Mrs. Yamamoto opens her mouth and basically says, well, what if Yoshino is the killer? What if he's the Mage of Exodus? What if he actually has, the split personality thing going on, and he's the killer? And Maharu's like, then I'll kill him. I was like, come on. Stop saying you're going to kill him. You know what? I'm going to kill you, Maharu. How about that? I'm going to fucking kill you. No one has ever said that. because no one wants to kill Maharu. No one's got a beef with him, you know? That just pisses me off. Now, moving on past that, we are thrown with a little light update. Now, apparently, the people right now in the present, from what a few of the people were saying, are siding with the Tree of Genesis and not the Tree of Exodus. So I thought that was definitely worth mentioning. Now, moving on past that to the past, guess what? Hokage runs into Aki. She notices her. She's in Japan, and she runs into Aki. Now, Aki right away notices that, you know what, Hokage is looking at her, and obviously Hokage, you know, mentioned some random bullshit about, you know, the food she was eating and whatnot, and Aki plays along and, you know, directs her to something else. I thought that was interesting. And you see Hokage running away into an alley, grabbing a can and using her magic, because, you know, she uses the can as an offering to the Tree of Genesis, and she jumps on the rooftop away from Aki to avoid any type of paradox, I guess, something like that. Maybe not a paradox, but just to avoid seeing Aki. Again, because there's like only 3 to 4 hours until Aki gets murdered, and weird how she sees her on the street like that. But sorry, I digress. Again, Hokage is now run away. She uses her magic to jump on the rooftop after leaving Aki. And she's like, okay, thank God, I'm away from her. And guess what? It gets even weirder. Aki appears on the rooftop. She must have used magic. I was like, what? What just fucking happened? I was like, I didn't even see this happening. Aki has powers? Are you sitting down for this? At the end of the episode, it gets better. Aki knows that Hokage is a representative for the Tree of Genesis. And then we find out that, you know, Hokage introduces herself as the princess of the Tree of Genesis. So now Aki knows the truth, and it gets better. Aki introduces herself to Hokage, formerly as, you know, Aki, you know, Fuya, whatever her real name is, of course, and that she's the Mage of Exodus, and a big-ass fucking sword appears, and that's where the episode ends. As for final thoughts, Mage of fucking Exodus, Aki, are you fucking kidding me? I didn't even see this coming. Are you kidding me? That's my reaction. I'm like, no, I didn't see this coming. Really? Aki? The fucking Mage of Exodus? Well, what about Hanamori? And what about Yoshino? What? Well, there goes those fucking guesses. Moving on past that, I can't wait for Maharu and Yoshino to find out the truth. And moving on past that, I think, this is my new theory, and this is weird for me to say this, I think Hokage is going to be the killer of Aki. I swear to God. I mean, this would actually make sense now. I mean, if she's really the Mage of Exodus, if Aki's the Mage of Exodus, and obviously Hokage is, you know, the princess of the Tree of Genesis, well, then that makes perfect sense that she's probably going to kill her. But, you know, that's just my small little theory right now. As for what I think of Hayakawa, yeah, let's just put him on the shelf for now, because the shit has already hit the fan more than once, so I no longer think he's a real villain. But that doesn't mean he's going to go anywhere. I still think he has a part to play in this. But again, that ends it for my final thoughts. As for my rating, are you fucking kidding me? 4 out of 5. 4 out of fucking 5. I love this episode. It was freaking amazing. We got a little new information, of course. Obviously, you know, Aki being the Mage of Exodus. Are you freaking kidding me? I did not see that coming. Now, moving on past that, all these fucking theories on who the Mage of Exodus is, who's gonna kill who, oh, that always had me on my toes. I'm like, what? Now, I didn't give this a 4 out of 5. A 4.5 out of 5, I should say. I didn't give this a 4.5 out of 5 because we didn't really get to see any fights. There was the build-up, and there wasn't a lot of romance and drama, kind of. But as for new information, as for a lot of twists and plots in this episode, oh, it was definitely there. So that's why I gave this a 4 out of 5. But again, guys, my final rating, 4 out of 5. But that ends it for my walkthrough and review of Blasted Tempest episode 20. But definitely comment down below, let me know, thumbs up, thumbs down. Definitely subscribe, check me out on Twitter, and follow me if you like. But let me know what you thought of this episode, and let me know what you think's gonna happen in the next episode that's coming out. But again, guys, that ends it for now, and I gotta hit the bricks. I gotta go. And before I go, I gotta say it. And I always say it. You can't stop the access, but you can watch the feed. I'll see you later, guys.